From MTN News, you're watching Montana This Morning.
Republican lawmakers in Helena want to limit the powers of the governor during long-term emergencies. Just ahead, learn why some of those legislators say they want to do that.
A lot has happened in the last 24 hours in the Bozeman School District. I'm Annie Johnson, and I'll fill you in on everything coming up.
A lot of news to get to in this final half hour of Montana This Morning. It is 6:30 for you on your Wednesday, January 13th. Chet Lehman, Matt Elwell, how you doing, guys?
Doing well.
Excellent.
Are we ready for an interesting day in the weather department?
It started as soon as I pulled out of the garage. I was impressed with how much ice disappeared from my driveway overnight.
Agreed.
Yeah, the temperatures right now holding near 40 degrees for much of the area, but we are also seeing some very gusty winds, 40-mile-an-hour plus winds out toward Ennis, 60 miles an hour out toward Livingston. The stronger winds still to come across the area. We do have a chance of rain that may switch over to snow very quickly late in the morning for a few areas. That could make things a little icy as you're driving home, especially at pass level for today. But really the story is going to be the wind through most of the day. Temperatures falling as you head into the afternoon, so dress appropriately. It will likely be colder when you get home from work than when you took off. We'll talk more about your forecast coming up in just a few minutes.
Thanks, Matt. A tanker crash and fire just south of Basin claimed the life of the driver of the truck last night.
Montana Highway Patrol tells MTN News the crash happened on Interstate 15 about 4:30 yesterday afternoon when the truck was traveling too fast for conditions on the wet roadway. 34-year-old man driving the truck was from out of state. Troopers say he lost control. The tanker rolled over and burst into flames. Now, those photos from the scene show only the charred remains of that truck. MHP says the crash caused officials to close southbound lanes of the interstate for about 7 hours. Traffic was diverted to Highway 69 at the Boulder interchange.
A Montana Legislative Committee is considering a bill to limit the governor's powers during an extended emergency.
Supporters see it as a response to orders put in place during the COVID-19 pandemic. MTN's Jonathan Ambarian picks up the story.
The House State Administration Committee heard testimony Tuesday on House Bill 122. Sponsor David Beatty, a Republican from Hamilton, says he wants to restore the balance between the governor and the legislature.
House Bill 122 leaves intact the governor's power to take immediate action when time is of essence. At the same time, it enables the legislature to fulfill its constitutional role even in times of crises.
HB 122 would limit a governor's initial declaration of emergency to 30 days and a disaster declaration to 60 days, unless the legislature agreed to extend it. It would make it easier for legislative leaders to call a special session and allow lawmakers to terminate a disaster declaration and put limits on the governor's emergency orders. Montana has been in a state of emergency since former Governor Steve Bullock's declaration last March. On Tuesday, of the bill said the governor's directives during that time too far.
I'd like this bill because it gives us, the people, an opportunity to speak with our legislators and so that they can get a feel for how the emergency in place or going on is affecting us, the people.
Beatty said the governor needs flexibility to act early, but the legislature should have a role when the situation lasts much longer.
The authors of Title 10 of the Montana Code rightly provided the governor extraordinary power to deal with time-sensitive immediate crises. But they surely did not foresee the governor retaining such extraordinary powers and the legislative branch being sidelined over an extended period, such has been the case for the pandemic we are currently undergoing.
No opponents spoke during the hearing. The committee took no immediate action on the bill. Now, MTN contacted the office of the current governor, Greg Gianforte, for comment on this bill. His press secretary said that we are very early in the lengthy legislative process, and the governor will carefully review any bill that the legislature sends to his desk. In Helena, Jonathan Ambarian, MTN News.
Now we're told Beatty also introduced another bill to give county and city leaders more authority over orders from local boards of health and health officers. That bill set for a hearing later on Thursday.
A perennial bill was heard Tuesday morning at the state legislature whether to make not wearing a seatbelt in Montana a primary offense that would allow law enforcement to pull you over solely because you're not wearing your seatbelt and write you a ticket. Under the bill, the fine for not wearing a seatbelt would be $20 and it wouldn't go on your driving record. The bill's sponsor, Representative Frank Smith of Poplar, says he spent 9 years on ambulance service on the Fort Peck Reservation and saw many people killed in traffic accidents because they didn't wear a seatbelt. But the American Civil Liberties Union of Montana opposed the bill Tuesday, saying that poor people and minorities are the ones most likely to get stopped and fined. An opponent, Mark French of Trout Creek, told the House Judiciary Committee it's not the job of government to keep people safe. He said wearing a seatbelt should be a personal choice and that being forced to wear one could actually be harmful.
I wear a seatbelt a lot of the time because I choose to, not because I'm forced to, but because I choose to. But I do not wear a seatbelt when I'm driving along a river. If I drive into the river with my wife, we're both belted up, and we go down into the river, and I can't get her out. She's knocked out, or I'm knocked out, and one of us dies. Are you going to be responsible for that?
Similar bills have been consistently rejected at prior legislators in Montana. The committee may vote on this bill later this week.
Well, new details on changes made for students in the Bozeman School District. MTN's Annie Johnson has more on how students are now joining in the conversation.
Nearly 5 hours, 230 attendees, and 8 board trustees later, and now we have some big changes coming out of the Bozeman School Board meeting.
It's never been a question of if we were going to go back, it's when we're going to go back.
Bozeman School Board met Monday night with hundreds of parents, students, and teachers all watching to see how students will continue learning for the rest of the year.
Move the high schools to 4+1 instruction on January 27th, pending any significant changes in COVID metrics/matrix data prior to January 27th.
So motion passes 5-3.
Moving on to middle school, students will move to 5 days in-person learning on February 1st, and elementary students will continue the current 5 days in-person learning.
I'm going to be pleased to vote for this. It feels like we're really using the matrix as intended.
The motion passed unanimously 7-0. Of course, trustees heard public comment from parents and teachers, but this meeting had a lot of students making sure their voices were also heard.
We need to be in school. We need to learn in person, seeing each other, being around everybody.
I strongly support staying in the 2-day blended model because I feel like if we were to go back to 5 days a week, that there would be too much quarantining and that ultimately we would be forced to go to full online.
I just wanted to inform the board that the blended model does not work for a large majority of students at Gallatin High School.
Dozens of others expressed their opinions as well. The next meeting is scheduled online for Monday, January 25th. Reporting in Bozeman, Annie Johnson, MTN News.
First responders rescued a man from the top of Big Butte after he was injured in a fall Monday evening. Butte police and firefighters responded to Big Butte, also known as the Big M, about 6:40 in the evening after a 21-year-old man was injured in a fall. The victim had climbed to the top of the Big Butte and fired a handgun before falling into a rocky area and injuring his spine. The victim was brought down from the hill on a rescue stretcher and taken to St. James Healthcare, where he remains hospitalized. Police do not know why the victim went up there to fire the gun.
Well, yesterday, the 2021 Race to the Sky canceled due to COVID-19. That race that runs from Lincoln to Seeley Lake is one of the longest running dog sled races in Montana, and it's an Iditarod qualifier for those competing in the 300-mile race. Race Secretary Pam Beckstrom said originally the board members who coordinate the race were optimistic that the race could continue with some slight adjustments to mitigate the spread of COVID-19. But as time wore on, Beckstrom says it became increasingly likely that the group wouldn't get that race off the ground.
When we realized that we couldn't have the mushers could not go into any of the buildings, it just became a safety issue for them. And it just felt like it was an uphill battle that we were probably going to have to just pass on for this year.
Beckstrom said this is only the second time the group has had to cancel the race. First time in early 2000s due to lack of snow. You can read more from Beckstrom about the race and this year's cancellation. Be sure to check out our story on montanasports.com. that year, early 2000s, 2000, 2001, something like that. No snow.
Really?
It's hard to do a sled dog race. Hard to do a sled dog race with no snow.
Absolutely. It would be a little tricky.
Yeah, that's a tough one. So,
well, that's sad, but you got to hope for better next year.
Yes.
Well, those popular Yelp reviews of social businesses are about to include something new. It's how the business enforces COVID safety rules. How that will work is coming up after the break.
But first, here's Tony DeCopel with a look at what's coming up at 7 o'clock on CBS This Morning.
Good morning. Ahead on CBS This Morning, Vice President Pence refuses to invoke the 25th Amendment, so President Trump is now on track to be the only U.S. president to be impeached twice. We'll talk with Congressman Adam Kinzinger, one of a growing number of House Republicans who say they'll vote for impeachment. Also, Democratic Senator Chris Murphy will join us. We'll get his thoughts on impeachment and why he's asking for radical reform, his words at the Pentagon after the assault on the Capitol. And only on CBS This Morning, Apple CEO Tim Cook reveals new details about the company's $100 million push to promote racial equality. We'll see you at 7.